We're live. All right. So first question. How did you come across my channel, and what are your impressions more broadly about what I'm doing on here?
Yeah, good question. I first saw your channel from YouTube recommending me the Dungeons and Dragons or whatever that game is. You did a political game,
The League of Legends one?
League of Legends version of politics, and I thought it was a good video, and I subscribed, and then I started watching some of your conversations with a couple of people, and I enjoyed them. Like I thought they were like, it's very rare to find conversations between people who are they're both trying to dig and try to get to the center or something, instead of just one person playing sophistry and trying to get the other guy to do all the digging so they can bury him. And so I noticed you guys are actually like honestly exchanging, and I'm like, okay, this is something I can actually watch and get something out of.
That's okay. That is encouraging, because well, it's not that often, but like, for example, I talk to JJ McCullough pretty often.
Yeah, those are the ones I watch.
Yeah, and JJ and I disagree quite vigorously on certain things. And there are people who are like, JJ, why are you talking to this guy? This guy's, terrible person, blah, blah, and stuff. And true, I am a terrible person. But
I see, let me just jump in on that, because I see you get a lot of shit, a lot of hater comments. But the way you just kind of laugh it off tells me a lot about you. You're able to just let that stuff, because the internet's wild. You're going to hear some crazy shit here. And so I just want to, give you some props for that.
I appreciate that. And I think the best thing is just knowing what I believe, like, we won't talk about this now, but like, the last conversation I had with JJ was about anti-Semitism and Judaism and stuff like that. It's like, well, I'm aware that I am saying things that many people would say, Paul, that's sort of an anti-Semitic thing, or that's a topic that is talked about by anti-Semites. And it's like, well, I know what I believe in my heart. I know the difference between Judaism, the religion, and Jews as a race. And I'm perfectly willing to criticize any religion for its manifest flaws. And so, like,
it's ideology.
Yeah, exactly. And so knowing what I truly believe, it's like, okay, well, you can say whatever you want in the comments, and the comments that do hurt are not hurt. I'm not. You know what? Not even gonna. I'm not gonna feed.
Don't give them that satisfaction.
Exactly. The comments that hurt are when people spam the Easter Island head statue in my comments, because I have a elongated face. Let's go with that. Anyway, yeah, I mean, Socratic dialogue is very, very useful. And I think when it's blended with a kind of edge and humor, I think it's even better.
Absolutely.
But what do you think have you seen any of my stuff around like Enlightened Centrism and all that?
Yes. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on it?
I've watched a couple of your shorter videos that are just kind of talking on certain topics. No, what I'll say about you, man, is like it's very rare to find somebody who's not, how do I say this? You're honest. You're not afraid to say something that is kind of controversial, but you're not going to do it in a way that is just trying to be an edgelord. You're actually seriously bringing up things that are controversial, but in a way where you're being serious. And it's hard. A lot of times people online are just either going to tote the line and say whatever that they're not going to get in trouble for. And they're sort of like party. It depends on what side of the political, both sides do this, where it's just like they're ideologically sort of like imprisoned, where they have to agree on all these points to be part of this club.
Yep.
And so you don't get a lot of you don't get any people who have any nuance. It's everyone. You can predict what everyone's going to say when every new headline comes out. You just go to X. The same people are saying the same things. For example, let me give you an example. Recently, the whole Biden made Trans Visibility Day on Easter. All the right-wing talking heads came out on X and said, Christians, you better rally. And in fact, David Pakman, whatever his name, not David Pakman. I can't remember his name. He does the show where it's Valuetainment. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, PBD, Patrick Bet David.
Patrick Bet David. Yes,
There's a David in his name somewhere.
Yeah. He was the worst with this. He came out straight up with propaganda mode, saying, "Listen up, Christians. Your entire nation is under attack. You see what Biden is doing? He's making your Easter, your holy day, trans visibility day. This is an attack on you guys." He did this. He made a video on X, said this, and it's like, dude. And then it comes out like, and by the way, most people knew this already without even have to like. Easter is not the same day every year. It's based on the Paschal moon. First full moon of the spring equinox sparks off the next Sunday is Easter. Boom. That's how they do it.
Yeah, like Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is on a different day.
Yeah. It's got to be on a Sunday.
And Trans Day of Visibility has always been
the same day, March 30th.
I retweeted. I think it was Liv Bory who said, "If community notes is worth its salt, it'll add something here to say Biden did not just declare Easter to be Trans Day of Visibility. It happens to land on that."
And that was my point is when certain headlines come out, you can see that everyone it's so predictable how they're going to respond. Yeah. The left does it too. But like that's just a recent example in my mind of like complete ideologically possessed. I'm using Peterson terminology here. But he's right about people being ideologically possessed. And there's an example of that. I think he's ideologically possessed now, but we can get into that.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, nobody hates Peterson's contract with the Daily Wire more than I do. Okay. Well, first off, I would ask about you and because your channel, first off, you've got like 6 or 7 videos that have like 1.5 million views, and they're all within the last 9 months. These like documentaries. Yeah. What's your
I don't have a PhD.
Okay, what is your background?
If you watch my videos, I talk to a lot of PhDs, and we talk on the phone. Like I am in these circles. That's one thing I can say. I'm not an expert in anything. There's not like one thing where I can say I'm an expert in this. This is how I describe it. I'm just a big fan of ancient texts, ancient religion, ancient philosophy, ancient history. I'm just a fan. That's it. I'm not an expert. I'm not an academic. I don't come at it in an academic point of view, even though I try to stick with the primary sources, and I try to stick with like what the scholars are saying about stuff. But I will cross those lines from time to time and give my own opinions on things, even though I'm not an expert. But that's my background. Let me just say this. It starts with Jordan Peterson. So I'm if you watch, like you talk about the one live I did where I was kind of making fun of Jordan Peterson. I was doing the accent thing with the Kermit the Frog. That was like a year ago, right?
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Well, I have to say this because I'm very harsh on Jordan Peterson because I'm not a fan of his being sort of bought by the conservative party. And I say conservative because it's like in Canada is a different party, and this is not just in America. He's an international guy. So I'm not a fan, and you can see it. You can tell it's the Peterson of 2016 you can watch his lectures. You could see this. He's very in the center. Like he would say things like that we need the left because the left says it's time to change. And sometimes it is time to change. And like that makes a lot of sense. You won't hear him say that now though. Now it's just, oh, they're communists. Oh, even the Nazis are somehow socialists because they have socialists in their name. He says shit like that now. Okay, so let me go back. I'm going ahead of myself. The reason why I need to stop being so harsh on Jordan Peterson, because the dude actually legitimately saved my life in a lot of ways. And so let's go back. So out of high school, I was real bad. I never was a student type of person. I always was just getting in trouble and hanging out with the wrong crowd. Ended up going to prison. We don't have to get into details about that. Let's just skip ahead. Ended up in prison on a 1 1/3 to 4 year sentence. And it was 2011. And, my mom sending me books because they could send you books there. And I remember she's like, I think I told you this story, but I'm just going to retell it for people who are watching now. And she's like, yeah, what books do you want? And I was like, yeah, send me the Al Capone biography. Send me I'm just like asking for dumb books that like for some dumb wannabe gangster wants to read. She's like, what about a self-help book? I was like, fine, send me one, whatever. And I don't know how she got, she doesn't even know who Jordan Peterson is.
Yeah, she probably just picked whatever the number one.
I went online, looked up self-help books, and Jordan Peterson must have came up.
Right.
Even though I don't even know, this is Maps of Meaning. This is not 12 Rules for Life. This is before that. So I don't know if that's really technically a self-help book, but maybe it just got lumped into that category, because you can kind of see where, because that's,
or he wrote 12 rules and then, or I guess 12 rules
this
was
is before that.
Yeah, because that was like 20.
But this is something that I've been wondering for a while. How did that book get? Maybe it's because
God.
Maybe it's psychology, so the psychology gets lumped into self-help.
Or God chose you because God's real.
I was going to say maybe it's divinely inspiration, because that book gets sent to me. I try reading it. I have no idea what the hell is going on here, but it's fascinating. All this stuff about these ancient religions and all this stuff about chaos and the serpent and I'm learning about who the Gnostics are. There's some stuff in there about Gnosticism. I don't understand it, but it's fascinating. And so 2 things I did in prison was read the Bible cover to cover, read Jordan Peterson in there, which I didn't understand. I couldn't go online, look up stuff to like find out what it means. I just had to guess at what he's saying. I have no idea. The best I can do is go on the bottom where the commentary notes are and try to. No idea. But it was like I was just jumping into an ocean, like just not understanding anything. Anyways, I get out, become a fundamentalist Christian for a while, like a long time. Become a fundamentalist Christian,
overcorrecting in a way.
Overcorrecting. I become addicted to Christianity. My addiction, because I went to prison for drugs, and addiction is part of it. So I switched on my addiction to Christianity. I become like full blown. And I'm jumping from church to church, and this church doesn't have the true way. This church does. Go to the next church. That pastor's wrong. I'm just like crazy. I'm just this crazy person going from church to church. And then, anyways, I ended up relapsing too. In 2018, this is the last time I used since then. Been clean over 6 years now. So
congratulations.
Thank you. But this was the last one. They sent me to like a 90-day rehab, and when I was there, now I know who Jordan Peterson is at this point, and I'm kind of a right-wing crazy person at this point. I'm an Alex Jones watcher at this point. I'm one of those guys. This is who I was at this point. And I'm a Trump fan, all that. And this is 2018, and I remember just being like, "Send me." This is just when 12 Rules for Life came out, and I'm like, "Mom, send me that book." Boom, send me that book. So I read him in there too. And so Jordan Peterson, in a way, I don't know. Reading his stuff and following him and being able to look up to somebody like that, who's speaking to people like me, people who are down in the dumps, people who are messy rooms, people who are complete messes and don't care. When Jordan Peterson was speaking to my ilk, and I have to admit this, that sort of way of thinking did get me out of those places of hell. And it's just ironic that now he's so into the political world now that I don't recognize the same Jordan Peterson that I was watching, binge watching all his lectures on Maps of Meaning after getting out. And, this guy who introduced me to Carl Jung, who introduced me to Nietzsche, who introduced me to all these. And this is where I started getting into ancient texts through reading him. And also, like, most of my background of learning about ancient texts is just from me going and reading primary sources like Plutarch, Diodorus of Sicily, Ovid, Virgil, whatever, Sumerian shit. All like just going and just wanting to know what's in there. The Vedas, Mahabharata. I've literally tried to read every ancient holy text that exists. I've tried. I don't know if I did, but I probably have like 50 under my belt by this point.
Sure.
And so Jordan Peterson is kind of the reason for that. So now I have a full-time career doing sort of a Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung approach to religion, maybe more on the skeptic side, but I'm not
sure.
Not as much. And so Jordan Peterson, he should deserve credit for my success in a lot of ways, even though I'm very critical of him.
Yeah, totally. No, there's a lot you said that mirrors a lot. First off, my
you muted. Oh, I didn't know if you knew.
Every time I touch this, it mutes. So I gotta not be so OCD about it. So I'll just
got it.
I'll do this. I'm gonna not move the stream. My older brother sent me a clip of Jordan Peterson, I think, originally. Actually, the first time I saw Jordan Peterson, he was on Steve Palkin's show or whatever. And it was just, he sounded like just a grumpy old man. And I saw what he said for like 5 minutes and then never watched him for the rest of it. And my older brother sent me a clip. My older brother went to prison for drugs too. And he said, coming out, that Jordan Peterson is like seeing a therapist without going to see a therapist. Like,
he's 100%. And I bet you there's millions of people out there like me and your brother who heard that person speak and were like, damn, he's speaking to me right now.
Yeah. And in like junior year of college is when I watched the Kathy Newman interview, which is when I went into all the Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson discussions about philosophy and all that. That's when I was like, okay, all right. Because I was in a bad spot as well. And that certainly all of my thinking now is fundamentally characterized by a lot of the principles in Maps of Meaning, or that Jordan Peterson talks about, like the dogmatic pursuit of truth. Never lie, right? Like lying distorts your perceptions to then, and then you inevitably run into things. It's like I see that everywhere. That's sort of how the whole idea of enlightened centrism, which is sort of my meme that I'm trying to make great again, is literally like a direct, somewhat reference to Peterson talking about the left has a place and the right has a place. The left is temperamentally adapted to exactly what you said. When the environment needs to change or is changing, the left is good at changing structures to adapt to that environment. And the conservatives are good at maintaining the stability of those structures that have worked in the past. And you need a dialogue between the two. Hence yin and yang.
That was like so core to him for so long.
And that's I will forever be a Peterson fan or a Maps of Meaning fan, because that's at the root of basically everything I do. Is what the thing I will never dispute, that there's a place for the left and a place for the right. And it's a matter of, getting the conversation right and unifying them. And that's sort of what I'm doing with enlightened centrism, however poorly.
Yeah, I can see that. I could definitely see
that. So okay, well, I wanted to ask, there were a couple things. So religion, because what do you think of Peterson's claim that everyone is religious? Because you're kind of left wing, right? You describe yourself as left wing.
Yeah, I am.
Listen, and let me be clear: nobody loves left wing more than I do. Okay,
it might, even though. So it's funny because I was very right wing for a while, for like a good chunk of the 2010s and all the way up until like 2019, probably 2020. Yeah, 2020 is when I started to go, what the fuck is going on? Like, I don't know. It was a slow turn. It didn't happen overnight.
Sure.
But now for some reason, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but
maybe
it's the personality type like Peterson. Maybe I'm straight open.
Probably. Yeah. Cause
that's true. I kind of am like
totally.
That, so.
Yeah. And I think in a classical sense, I'm temperamentally progressive. But I think in a cultural sense, if anything, I lean right, just because it's like, well, if it's a right wing to say, I think we should support the institution of monogamy, and I think we should not have a wide open border. Like, okay, well then that's fine. Then in that case, I'm right wing, and if you want to redefine those words to whatever, it's like I don't even care at that point. Yeah. I will never be right wing if it means I'm against gay marriage, or I believe that if a 19-year-old girl takes a Plan B pill, or not a Plan B pill, an abortion pill, that's first-degree murder, and now we're going to lock her up. It's like, that's insane. Right. So the Christo-fascists just don't have the power right now that the postmodern, religion, the Foucauldian fundamentalists on the left have. So anyway, on religion, because I'm curious where we might diverge on some of the Maps of Meaning stuff, or because at a certain point it goes from Maps of Meaning to politics, and so I'm just curious where. But do you think, like Peterson says, everyone's religious? I believe that. I believe religion is fundamentally a adaptive meme. You're familiar with Richard Dawkins' like mimetic theory and all that? Yeah. So religion is fundamentally, or at least the religions that have been around for the longest time, are adaptive meme complexes that improve fitness, but it has to be adapted to the environment, which is why literalist interpretations, which just go, well, this is what it said, and this is what we're going to believe. It's like, that is not, there is a whole cognitive process associated with the underlying religious text that is required for it to produce well-being, so to speak. But I do believe everyone is religious, in that everyone
If
serves the highest
if
value. So on and so forth. Go
if
ahead.
you define religion that way, then yeah, because it depends on how we define religion. If we
Yes.
define religion as a way of life, simply just your way of life, then everyone has a way of life. If we define religion
That's
as,
how Jordan Peterson defines it. I think that's the best way to define it.
that's probably how he defines it. I think there's,
What do you think?
and the ancient Greeks would define it that way. The ancient Greeks didn't define religion as just being what you believe in God with. We sort of had that's sort of the religion. I think that's from 1,000+ years of Christianity dominating religion, sort of forcing the culture. Everyone has to believe in this or else. That sort of changed the definition of religion. And I know, like, Dan McClellan defines it differently. He defines religion as like an ethnic religion, like, you know, how Judaism, there are people who are Jewish who don't necessarily read the Torah and don't believe in it, but they're just Jewish, and they still attend their Passover. They still follow the whole tradition. My cousin's a great example of this. Not as a Jewish, but he's Catholic. We grew up Catholic, and if you really pushed him on it, he's probably an atheist. He's very liberal. He's never taught. He doesn't care about the Bible. If anything, he's agnostic / somewhere in there.
I think a lot of Christians are.
Yeah, but he's having a child very soon, actually. And he told me when I visited him in New York City recently, he told me that he plans on raising the child the way we were, sort of liberally. We went through the motions. We got confirmed. We went through Eucharist. We went through the baptism. We did the 9 yards. And then after it was all over, we were like in high school. They said, "All right, you're done. You know, you can come back or you don't have to." That's kind of how the Roman Catholic Church operates in New York. And he said, you know, honestly, I think that's a fair. I like their approach. I want to give my child the same opportunity to choose. And what am I gonna like? I think it's a fine idea. I don't have a problem with that, actually. And I think that's the way Dan McClellan interprets what religion is. It's sort of like your upbringing. It sort of is like in what him and Peterson would disagree on meaning. And Dan McClellan would he'd be the ultimate postmodernist.
Oh God.
Because Dan McClellan, he just recently put out a video that says,
I think I know who Dan McClellan is, by the way.
He's like one of the top religious scholars.
He makes a lot of TikToks, right? Oh, you showed him a couple clips in that stream, I think.
No, I think someone else showed. I think what's his name showed it to you recently. But while you're looking,
this guy, he's on.
Yeah.
I'll just share it for people watching.
Sure.
Image, but go ahead, keep going.
So he recently put out a video that says the Bible has no meaning, and that is the most anti-Peterson thing you can ever say, because Peterson's all about
the Bible has no meaning.
The Bible has. You can even find it in his YouTube channel if you want to play it. So it's a quick video. I don't think
Bible has. Is it because the Bible is because meaning is a process that occurs in between the subject and the object?
No,
I agree with that.
The way he would explain it is this, and he's actually 100% correct. This is a fact. The Bible wasn't written as a cohesive story from start to finish. It's a collection of texts, even
assembled.
Even one book like Genesis, for example, is also a collection of texts.
Yes.
Genesis is not written by Moses, by one guy sitting there writing it down. That's what the story says, but it's not. There's layers of strata of text in Genesis. There's two different stories of Moses twined together. It's called the documentary hypothesis, and it's like
and there's like a priestly account versus a something other account in Genesis.
Deuteronomy account.
I have McClellan's video on Bible has no inherent meaning.
By the way, Jordan Peterson knows this. In Maps of Meaning, he talks about the Yahwist sources. He knows this, which is wild. So, but Jordan Peterson doesn't care. He thinks even if you take a bunch of different stories and put them together, you can make meaning from it, right? Where Dan McClellan was, hey, go ahead, play this clip.
Interesting. Yeah, well, let's watch it, and then we'll talk about that specifically, because I may agree depending on what he means, but we'll see.
Yeah.
The Bible has no inherent meaning.
Can you hear it?
Hey, everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and the fit for this video is Maimonides' nuts. Like all texts,
all right,
the Bible
grifter. No, I'm just kidding.
Has no inherent meaning. Any meaning that we find in it when we read is meaning that we are creating ourselves, and we frequently get it wrong. And that's because we create that meaning based on our experiences with and our knowledge of agreements that have been reached regarding what kind of semantic content is going to be associated with what combinations of sounds and what combinations of squiggles. But that changes from time to time, from place to place, from context to context, from person to person. And I'll give you just one example of how we can misunderstand this. If we look in the King James Version, the New Testament book of Jude, verse 22, it says, "Of some have compassion, making a difference." And that has been understood for generations to mean if you show compassion to folks, you can have a positive influence on them. You can have positive impact on their lives. And that is a beautiful message. And it also has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with what the King James translators were trying to communicate. Because the agreement that we're familiar with, that to make a difference and making a difference would be connected with the idea of having a positive influence or impact, that agreement didn't exist until about 1900. Prior to that, it meant making a distinction, discerning. That's what it meant back in 1611 when it was published. And that's what we see, for instance, in Leviticus, where it says to make a difference between clean and unclean animals. And so this passage is actually saying, have compassion on some, but be discerning on whom. It's an entirely different message. And if we didn't have experience with and understanding of that specific agreement, and we probably didn't because that has been obsolete for over a century, then whatever meaning we create in our minds is wrong. And we usually don't even catch it when we create the meaning wrong. But this is another illustration of the fact that there is no meaning in the Bible. We create it all ourselves.
I agree. I think Jordan Peterson would absolutely agree with this. Because
you might be right, because he would then say, sure, but we do, since we make meaning, there is meaning.
Yeah, well, but even more specifically, because this is hermeneutics, correct? Isn't hermeneutics the science, or not the science, but the school of interpreting like the Bible, I believe, hermeneutics?
The branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially.
Yeah. So hermeneutic, whatever. Okay, so hermeneutics is the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary text. Hermeneutics is what constitutional scholars do with the Constitution, right? And this is why I like the more ubiquitous definition of religion, because it allows you to see things more for what they are. The Constitution, we're supposed to interpret what the founders meant at the time, or whatever. It's like, okay, the same process by which they're trying to interpret the words of the Constitution and the meaning is what theologians do with the Bible. And it becomes more complex with the Bible because there's linguistic translations. A couple of them, Jordan Peterson points this out, the meek shall inherit the earth. I don't know if you've heard this thing by him.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, so he says
that's because it's a mistranslation. People who keep their swords sheathed are the ones,
right? The ones who know how to use their swords but keep them sheathed shall inherit. That's what meek really means, as opposed to weak, which I think that's based. That sounds cool as fuck, in my opinion.
Dan McClellan actually made a video about that,
about Peterson's commentary on it.
Yeah,
and what does he say? Does he agree with it, or
I forgot what he says? But he disagrees with the whole way.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we may have to look at that one.
Pull it up.
Yeah. But just to get to the point of this is literalism versus. This is my point about you take the religious text and then you apply it to the environment. I just watched a video. I was going back looking for a thing Peterson said. He says,
I'll give you the link to that video, by the way.
Okay, I'll pull it up in a sec. He says we can't let the literalists get away with them saying, well, this is what it says, so therefore that's what it means. It's like you just outsourced so much of your thinking to whoever translated that Bible, to all of their biases as a human. So the Bible can't contain all the meaning because we have to do the hermeneutics to apply.
I get what you're trying to say, and I actually agree with you. So scholars can get so scholar-brained that they forget that they're going like this, and they're looking at a tree, but they're missing the whole forest. Dan McClellan, I think, does this. And I'll give you an example. Like Dan McClellan, he talks about how one of the examples he gives is about Molech being he's not a real god. Molech's not a real god that people sacrifice to. We can't find him throughout in archaeology. We've never found any Molech. We only find what looks like to be a type of sacrifice called a Molech. And even though he's right, after the Bible gets written and you put Molech into the story as the god of the Ammonites, it doesn't matter if he's real or not. He becomes real because he's in the story.
Yes.
So it'd be like saying, Merlin never existed. So there's no Merlin there's no Merlin in the King Arthur story. Yeah, Merlin's in the story still. So you can't rewrite the Bible because what you found in archaeology. The Bible is the Bible. So it doesn't matter, even if the author knew that there wasn't a Molech, even though he wrote it as a god, you have to keep it that way because that's what the author intended. Right?
Maybe, depending on, I think I agree with your point about like Moloch doesn't have to literally exist, or Merlin doesn't have to literally exist for it to have psychological significance in the narrative structure.
And that's another layer for that. Yeah,
right. And that's where like archetypes come in and stuff. Like it's almost irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant who No,
you made a good point actually, because Molech coming from a sacrifice to a god could be the whole point. It could be the whole point. The author could be saying, we're giving up our children as sacrifices because this, that, and the third. We're worshiping all these idols. Yeah, that's probably like what they're trying to get across.
Yeah,
and so someone like Dan with his scholar brain, he's scholar brain
on it. Okay.
And he's not like letting it just be. He's trying to pick it apart so much.
And I want to watch this in a sec, but just exactly to that point of, like, for example, I this is how I view like American mythology. Like George Washington, it's almost irrelevant what Washington's character actually was. It's not totally irrelevant, obviously, because it influences reality. But like, let's just say it was all lies about him. The mythological figure that George Washington serves in our founding myths, he never lied. What's the chop down? Or is that Lincoln that said the cherry tree? I think that's Washington.
That's Washington, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, who the fuck never lies? Like, he might as well be a divine figure at that point.
And it's a good point, because you could see how this would be done with Jesus. It's like,
exactly.
Did Jesus do all these miracles? No, that didn't exist.
Yes. And that's why and this is why religious stories have a power that cannot be matched by any historical story. Because as soon as you elevate any historical figure, like Martin Luther King or George Washington or whoever.
Pythagoras was doing miracles in his stories.
As soon as you elevate them to like almost a divine status, or to say this person is so good that we're going to use this person to represent an entire idea, what you risk then is the fucking Foucault archaeology postmodern going in and saying, well, if I can find a historical flaw with this figure, now I can call into question the very ideology that this figure is representing. Martin Luther King was a Southern Baptist minister. He did not have the most progressive views on gay people, okay? So one could say, well, because Martin Luther King was homophobic, now we can invalidate everything he said about, all the good stuff about, judging content of character. Jesus, being a mythical figure, he's a historical figure, but even that, whatever, there's ambiguity there.
Given legends, right?
Yeah, he's immune to that, right? So the reason Jesus is a better, the meta giant or God or whatever, on which all shoulders of giants stand or whatever, is because you can't historically criticize him, because if he's anything, he's by definition the perfect man, immune from criticism, right? And so that's why he's a better representation of whatever the good ideology is. Now, of course, he said some crazy shit, and I think the Sermon on the Mount has got some questionable things in it and all that stuff, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense or.
No, I agree. That was well said.
Okay. All right. We'll play this clip.
You're going to like this.
Okay.
Oops. Inherit the earth. And I thought, there's something wrong with that. That line just doesn't make sense to me. Meek just doesn't seem to me to be a moral virtue. Meek is not a good translation.
All right, let's see it.
What it means is this. Those who have swords and know how to use them, but
by the way,
sheath, will inherit the world.
I have to say this. For anyone who's like, well, how does he know? Dan McClellan's a PhD. His PhD is in linguistics. He's a wizard with Hebrew, Greek. So this is this is his domain. Okay, so everyone knows that.
Yeah.
You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
So this is pure and utter nonsense. The Greek word in question here is praeis, which in Koine Greek has reference to someone who treats other people with gentleness, with kindness, with meekness, because they are not overly impressed with their own sense of self-importance. And so it is intended as a contrast to and the antithesis of the person who treats other people dismissively and condescendingly and belligerently, because they are impressed with their own sense of self-importance. So there's no sense inherent in the word's actual usage of a degree of constraint or contextual control in this treatment of other people with gentleness. It just refers to that gentle treatment. And so that is being read in by Dr. Peterson because he does not want to submit to what the main message of the Beatitudes and the broader Sermon on the Mount is, which is that God's people are the opposite of what the world expects God's people to be. It's not the successful. It's not the warrior. It's not the violent. It is the poor. It is the gentle. It is the persecuted. It is the hungry and the thirsty. Dr. Peterson wants to read all of this in to renegotiate the message of the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, because Dr. Peterson wants this to be about what the world expects God's successful people to be about. And it is, again, just pure and utter nonsense.
Okay. It's very interesting because number one, he could very well be correct. I don't know. I'd have to look at what Jordan Peterson was. I don't know if he's referencing Hebrew or Greek or whatever. But what's interesting is how almost a performative contradiction that Dan just did, which is that he says Peterson is wrong about the interpretation, pure and just utter nonsense. And instead of saying, well, he could have gotten his mistranslations, or I don't know what Peterson is referring to. I don't know why Peterson said that. I don't know what specific words Peterson was looking at. He says, the reason Peterson did this is because he wants to read into his motivation. Whatever. It's like, how the fuck does Dan know what Peterson's motivations are? Because in my mind, as someone who likes Peterson broadly and believes that for all his faults, he believes, he says what he believes, whether or not he's wrong. I'm like, my first instinct is, well, okay, first off, as a Dan, you should figure out what Peterson specifically, why he came to that conclusion instead of just ascribing this cynical motivation to him, which, so I've seen his stuff before. I don't like he seems pretentious and wrong.
Him and Jordan Peterson are polar opposites.
Yeah.
So it's good. I like to hear the dialogue. I wish there was more back and forth between
There's nothing more interesting to me than very intelligent people criticizing.
That would be a valuable debate if they would.
Oh, totally. Or Alex O'Connor. Do you know Alex O'Connor?
Yeah.
I watch and learn a lot from Alex O'Connor. Yes. And that's why his criticism of like Jordan Peterson, I'm like, okay, this is the most interesting possible thing because these are two people I respect. Same with Sam Harris versus Jordan Peterson. It's like that's when I can know they're both trying to get down to whatever the truth is. It's not like Peterson versus Michael Dyson or something.
Notice something with this is a perfect example of the idea of interpretation versus literalism, because what Dan is doing as a linguist, he's going to the etymology of the word. And there's a website called Perseus Tufts. Actually, can I share my screen real quick just to show you what I'm talking about? All right, this is you'll like this. All right, so
yeah, hit present, share, and then I'll pull it up.
Okay. Propos. I actually looked at this is the word for meek in the New Testament. So someone like Dan McClellan would come to this website and they would look. Every time the word has been used in the Greek language ever. So look you have Homer. You have I'm not sure who that is, Xenophon, Plutarch, the Herodotus. See, these are all these different examples of the word being used, and it's like, okay, all these examples here, all these examples here, making mild, taming,
or right in the middle too.
So Jordan can come back and say, well, it's used for taming.
Exactly, right? That's interesting.
That's true, but the number one is like, okay, of meek, whatever. But the point I'm making is what Dan McClellan's doing is he's going into the etymology, he's going into the word usage and saying this is what the word literally means. But what Peterson's doing is he's saying, well, he's interpreting it through his kind of his worldview, right? I would say so.
Yeah. Well, and wait, you said interpreting through his what worldview?
Through his worldview.
Yeah, through his worldview. Yeah. And Peterson is, and this is, I'd say, my fundamental philosophical disposition, as pretentious of a sentence that is to say, is like pragmatic in terms of it's not worth talking about anything unless it has practical utility. And Peterson, in my mind, is looking at the Bible, mining it for psychological significance, and then packaging it up and providing it to people in a way that's beneficial, as we talked about in the beginning, beneficial for you, me, my brother, whoever.
Yeah. And he looks at the Bible as an interconnected text that's referencing each other.
That hyperlink image he shows.
And he's right about that, because there is a lot of that going on. And someone like Dan would say, well, we have to look at every verse from its original context, what the author actually meant. And I actually don't agree with that. I think when the redactors come along centuries later and they put this, they make their edits and they put in whatever books they think in a certain order, they're making a new book from that. So I'm not saying that scholars shouldn't want to explore the original context. They shouldn't want that should be being done.
Sure.
We want to know what these texts originally meant, but that also doesn't mean that when these texts get put together in the 3rd century BC or whatever and translated into Greek, it becomes a new entity.
Also, I sort of reject the idea that author's intent even matters in a lot of ways, because because the thing about art, and I would put literature and mythology in that same category, is it speaks for itself independent of the artist's meaning. So for example, if I make a song and I say, well, this song is about my parents' divorce, or this song is about, my dog that died.
Objectively, that's what you wrote it about.
Yeah, exactly. That was literally the motivation for whatever I wrote. And then someone hears it and goes, oh, this reminds me of my breakup or something like that. And it means so much to me.
Right.
Exactly. So it's like, and I would say the author's intent when making that song is irrelevant to the objective quality of the song, which I would say is measured in the psychological effect it has on others.
Right.
I would say the same thing about more specifically, and I think this is a more controversial or at least maybe well-known example, is I believe the writers of The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers or whatever, I think they're both transgender, or one of them is transgender.
Both
and
are.
they said The Matrix is an allegory for being transgender. It's like,
they said that.
I believe that that's what was going through their mind when they wrote it. But isn't
it ironic that all the right wing
they use The Matrix? Yeah. Well, it's like the fact that it appeals to literally everyone, independent of whether or not they're trans, is clearly evidence that it's not communicating your intent per se. You used your intent. You used an emotional motivation to produce the art. The art has objective or intersubjective qualities to it that then produce a psychological effect in other people, and that's the meaning of the art, so to speak. So it's like, well, The Matrix is an allegory for being trans. It's like, okay, well, if that was the case, or if that was what it truly meant in the fundamental sense, or that was the objective meaning, then millions of cis straight people wouldn't have gotten what it is. It's clearly deeper because it's, and I'm sure obviously the trans experience is a real experience. So
sure.
Obviously it's going to have elements of the universal experience. So,
but I think you're making a good point. And then, because if somebody watches a movie and it makes them feel some type of way, and they're connected to this movie because of whatever reason, that's a real thing. Like, that happened.
Yes.
The person felt those things. You can't just tell them, no, the movie actually means this, you're wrong. Because it doesn't matter at that point. They already went through that emotional exchange with the film. It happened. That's a fact. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that's why when Dan says, we don't, like, the Bible contains no meaning, it's like, well, sure, it's like it's that semi-provocative, or it's like a Mott and Bailey, I would say, where it's like, I could say all women are hypocrites, and I'm like, oh, well, this guy's a red pill guy. It's like, well, all women are hypocrites because all people are hypocrites, and it's like, okay, you're not really making a real point. That you're saying that. So when he says the Bible has no meaning, well, he's pointing to the philosophical fact that meaning is derived in the process in the what is it called? It's an affordance quality. When it there are things that are objective measures of intersubjective why don't you call it quality? So like fitness, like grasp, like the graspability of this is John Vervaeke's example. Like the graspability of a cup is not inherent to the cup. It's a measure of my hand in its relationship to the cup. And so that's an affordance thing. So meaning is an affordance quality which exists between the object and the subject or whatnot. So, and that's where that's where we get postmodernists, because it's like, oh, well, you're saying that the Bible doesn't have inherent meaning, or that like objective truth, because like compared to Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson's super postmodernist, right? Or at least that's the critique levied against him. But okay, I want to ask you something else, unless you've got something related to this.
That was perfect.
Okay, related to where'd it go? Related to politics.
Oh, here we go.
You are a filthy socialist, correct?
So I would say I actually went to school for economics. I didn't finish my bachelor's. I got a 2-year degree, associates. Then I went to my junior year, and then COVID hit, and never went back. I was literally during, what year was that? 2020 or not 2018 or 19 or something? 19.
2020
Yeah.
is when COVID is.
Yeah.
March of 2020.
Yeah,
was
because
COVID.
like, as I already explained to the people, I went through the rehab in 2018, and that's when I went back to school. It was already years since I had my 2-year degree. Then I took my 2-year degree and said, I'm going to go back and try to get my bet. And then I never actually finished. Anyways, you know, I was a business student, economics student, and I don't even know why I brought that up. I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist or anything. But there are some things that I did learn about what we would call socialist policies that are very beneficial and are proven mathematically, objectively to work. Right?
That might be that might be a stretch. Proven mathematically objective.
Well, here's what I mean.
Objective truth doesn't exist. Remember,
here's what I mean by that. So we would take. So if you look at communist Russia, it failed. And that's the ultimate example of like the farthest way of going into socialism. What could happen? The state just takes over all facets of life. Command economy, no free markets. Everything's unionized. Everything's the state. But if you have an open market system, and there are ills of capitalism, we all know that.
Yes,
Marx
technically negative externalities are
Marx
acknowledged within the capitalist framework.
Marx makes some good points.
Oh yeah, Marx had some great ideas.
The way, so
not the anti-Semitic ones, but other ideas.
Let's look at it. Let's look at it like this: when a person who gets sick, you give them medicine. Now, medicine doesn't. You can't just take a bunch of medicines and it doesn't make you healthy. They'll kill you. You know what I mean? But little doses of medicine will actually heal your ills.
It works within your immune system.
Right. So people on the right, especially, are when they hear about a certain program, I don't know, whatever, welfare programs, whatever. And they go, that's socialism. I heard from that podcast that's socialism. That's bad. That's going to lead us to, we're going to be like communist Russia. It's like, no. We're treating the ills of a system. And I fully believe in the market. I believe in, free exchange of goods, but I also think there are situations where there are legitimate times where government can make the system run better.
Yes.
And we would call those socialistic programs, whatever you want to call it.
Or even just regulation.
Yes, regulation. Exactly. So that's what I mean by that. So am I socialist? No, I'm a mixed economist guy. I'm not
you know what that's called? You know what that's called? That's called Enlightened Centrists.
I knew you'd say that. Well, no, because it's like people think you have to be either a capitalist or a communist. It's like, no, you don't. You can be in the middle.
No.
There is no pure capitalism. There is no pure communism anywhere in the world. Everything's mixed now. Even China, people want to call China full communism.
Yeah.
Really not. It's a mixed economy. There's markets there too.
Yeah. It's also it's a running joke on my channel that I just endlessly mock libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists in particular, the ones who want to abolish the government, because that is as dumb of an idea as abolishing private property, in my opinion. And it, like, okay, well, I start from the position, the anarcho-capitalists are clearly fucking wrong, because the most basic elements of free market exchange involve regulation of some kind. Like, for example, how do I enter a contract with you? Well, first, it assumes that there's a system that enforces contracts, that isn't a warlord. Well, how do I exchange currency with you? Well, it assumes that someone is printing currency. And it's like, even if it's not what do you call it? The US dollar, if it's Bitcoin, which I'm, to the degree that I understand it, generally a fan of Bitcoin. Although that certainly would be, well, it depends on, because we don't want Bitcoin being used to buy the worst possible commodities one can buy involving, child exploitation and so on and so forth.
And then, okay, finish that thought.
Yeah, but so it's like, it's clearly the anarcho-capitalist can't be right. So we're going to move slowly this way. And as we get more and more technologically advanced, it's like, it's clearer. We should be more and more, well, I don't know. So, the meme, I saw this, socialism equals the state does stuff. Honestly, that's That's the simplest way to put it, guys. That really is, and that should be how we think about it. Because socialism of, well, we're not going to have private property. It's like that is just not even. That's as dumb as saying let's abolish the government. So I'm not even going to put that in.
Yeah, and
my
so the
mind.
libertarian wet dream of there is no state and everybody just it's all privately owned stuff. If you actually think about that and run the course till its final product, if you will, like play the tape through. Imagine what would happen if you did that. You would have everything privately owned, including roads, including parks and lands, and you would end up in a prison planet where I can't even go down that road because someone owns it. So I have to like find a. You might even get like gridlocked in some area because there might be some. Yep. There might be some disputes between these people over here and these people over here. And
that is a funny example. I own a plot of land and then someone buys the entire plot of land around it. And according to the libertarian, they're allowed to shoot me if I walk on their pledge.
You're done. And like people don't think about that stuff. Like there has to be some sort of regulator, some sort of moderator in the middle. Yeah. Period.
Yeah. Fuck, I just had a thought. Something enlightened centrism. Social, yeah, I mean, well, and like for example, there's also just it's interesting because I would say Peterson inspired this point that he says your rights are my responsibility. That's like one of his most famous clips. Your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are technically, and what that indicates to me is this fetishistic obsession with freedom, which I would say characterizes the far left and not the far left, the left and the right. Because the right, obviously, they love freedom this, freedom that, freedom that. The left loves freedom from like a moral perspective. Like, I don't want to
expression.
Exactly. I don't want to be obligated to raise kids. I don't want to, have to do things that society says I should do. I should be able to do whatever degeneracy I want. It's like pure freedom is foolish because all of your rights require a social structure, a functioning social structure to enforce those rights. So your rights are predicated on your giving back to the collective that enforces and protects your rights. And so I'm very big on basic stuff of like, look, if obviously, we talk about like universal healthcare or something like that. It's like, obviously, this is my perspective. If someone is walking down the street and a tire flies off from a car and nails them in the back. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos, like those pedestrian walking down the street, tire from 100 yards away just nails them. Okay. That is something that I would say we as a society should get together and say, freak shit accidents like that should not make you go broke. We'll all put a little bit of our money in to insure against that so that you can, okay.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm firmly planted in the socialist left-wing side in that. But then it's like, okay, hold on. If you eat like 10 cheeseburgers a day and smoke cigarettes, are you entitled to an endless number of triple bypass surgeries? So, well, okay, that's where it gets squirrely, right? That's where the Enlightened Centrist line has to be drawn. But people who just outright reject the idea of like, no, I don't believe I should have to pay for anyone's healthcare. I was born into this world with infinite rights because I'm such a special human being because I live in America and therefore I'm special. And even though all my, ancestors had to fight for all these rights, I don't have to lift a goddamn finger to earn, anything. It's like, no, you have a responsibility to sacrifice some of your individuality in service of the collective. That's just a fact. And that's a Petersonian point, I would say.
Yeah. And a lot of these like traditionalist people on the right, they love the Romans, right? You see they got their avatars.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Did you know what the Elementa is?
Hold on, that's a map of the Roman Empire right there. I was accused of being a white nationalist because I have this haircut and the Roman Empire map behind me.
You know what the Elementa is? It's
Elementa?
a welfare state that the Romans set up from the 1st century all the way to the end of the 3rd century.
Elementa?
Elementa. It's a full-blown welfare.
Can you spell that?
Subsidize orphans, ALIMENTA. So it subsidizes orphans, poor children, foods. It's like a food stamps program. And also it's there was agricultural reforms even before that. If you look at the times of the Roman Republic, Sulla, Marius, and the Gracchi before that, there was all these reforms to get the state involved so that we can make sure that farmers are taken care of because the farmers are going to feed everybody. This is stuff that this is ancient stuff.
Mhm.
It's just common sense.
The Romans are obviously they've done a bunch of terrible stuff, but everyone's again. Martin Luther King was homophobic, so like the argument that these people were bad, therefore we're going to invalidate everything. The Romans, I didn't know that. That's base as fuck. The idea of citizenship based on service, it's like it's your Roman citizenship is not dependent on an ethnicity, because conquered territories could serve, and then they could get a plot of land and all that. I know there were auxiliaries and stuff like that. There was some nuance to that.
You could become a Roman citizen as someone who's Jewish or something like it.
Yeah. And one of the, I would say, most pro-social things, my understanding of what they did, was when they would conquer a nation. Of course, sometimes they would just like slaughter 1 out of 3 of them, which I think Julius Caesar did, like in Gaul. So it's not, we're speaking with exceptions, let's say. But it was a very common practice, or I would say it was the fundamental practice, to the degree I understand it, where instead of the Romans coming in and saying, we're going to burn down all your temples and say, fuck that, they allowed them to maintain some level of autonomy. And then what they did is they just integrated those local gods into the Roman pantheon and said, yeah, look, your god, sure, we'll welcome them in, but they're all going to serve the Jupiter, the Roman god. And this is, I believe, what the Christians did with the saints. So if you look at the different saints in Europe or whatever, like in Ireland.
So you're making such a good point. I talked about this a lot in my video. So absolutely, the Romans, it's called the Roman Imperial Cult, and they're a Pontifex Maximus. If you actually look up the etymology of that word, by the way, right now the Pope, and he has that title, Pontifex Maximus. Yep. This is a title that goes back to Julius Caesar and way before 500, 600 years before Julius Caesar. It means high priest. Pontiff means priest. Maximus means highest. But Pontiff means priest. But it also means bridge builder. Plutarch, in his lives, I can't remember which live. I think it might have been the life of Julius Caesar, where he tells you this word Pontifex. We use it for priest. Pontificate, to talk to people. Mm-hmm. But the original wording was to build a bridge. Sure. And think about what that entails. Your pontifex is going into these other nations and saying, "Okay, what's your culture like? You worship Yahweh. He's kind of like Jupiter. All right, well, let's just put those two together. Yeah, and they sync gods together. That's why you get and this happened even in the Greeks before the Romans. They'd go down to Egypt and say, "You worship Osiris. Well, that's Dionysus." So they would do you would see hyphenated Osiris / Dionysus. And there'd be a statue there of Dionysus. Yep. So Isis is Aphrodite. And they would do this. They would sort of meet each other in the middle, build bridges, right? And then you would get a culture. You get a unified culture surrounding the Mediterranean where everybody could sort of keep their traditions that their ancestors passed down. But the Romans are still formulating a culture.
That is the most enlightened centrist shit, because I'll tell you, and this is only in the last couple, I would say,
Christians do it too.
Months. Yeah, the saints. I know the example. There's a specific Irish saint where it's Saint something or other, and there aren't the imagery of the saint has a lot to do with snakes. I don't think there's any snakes in Ireland.
St. Patrick.
Maybe it is. Yeah, St. Patrick. And I could be wrong. But I believe I heard there are no snakes in Ireland, which is why that is unique, because it was clearly it was an identification with a different deity.
Yeah.
And the Christians kind of Christianized it or whatever.
And so this is a great example. So what the Christians do is they take that playbook, because they're still the Romans, the Byzantines are still the Romans, and even Ostrogothic Italy they're calling themselves Roman too. So there's Rome just kind of breaks up into little children of Rome.
Yeah.
And so they use the same playbook as they go in these other places. There's a letter from Pope Gregory, and people can look this up. It's in the text of Venerable Bede. It's a text from the 7th century. Bede, Bede is the author's name. And he in this text he preserves a letter from Pope Gregory, and it's a letter to the bishop all the way in London. Can't remember the guy's name, but he tells this guy, he says, "Do not destroy the pagan sites. Go in there, sprinkle holy water on it, take the idol out, put a cross in there, and let the people continue to do their whatever they do. Let them worship, let them whatever. If they have if they have a sacred tree, keep it.
All their holidays.
Keep
like
their holidays.
Christmas.
Christmas is one. There's that Yule stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of back and forth on how much influence. I think most of it comes from Saturnalia. But here's another thing. You mentioned St. Patrick. There's a story. It's called like the Akalam na Sirach. It's like some Gallic language. It's a text, and St. Patrick's in this text. He's like a wonder-working miracle guy. And he's hanging out with all these druids, these pagan druids, and they're friendly with each other in the text. You could see how this is the pontifex stuff going on. This is the bridge building. And they had this holiday called what is it called again? Samhain. It's spelled Samhian. And that's their New Year's. So the Gauls actually celebrated New Year's at the fall equinox instead of what the Romans did it at the winter solstice. So right at the time of October, at the end of October, well, actually after the fall, but anyways, roughly speaking, when fall would hit, when winter would start, they would start their new year. So they would do it on October 31st, October 31st through November 1st. That would be their New Year's celebration. And what they would do, the Romans used to do this at their New Year's festival, which is called the Janus, Janus festival. Janus is the two-headed god, looks forward, looks backwards, time god. And during this Janus festival, kids would put masks on and go from door to door to door and get gifts from the nobles. It was a good time for poor to get some wealth.
Sounds like Halloween.
The poor would come in from the outer cities, and they would come in, and all the rich people in the inner cities would give them valuable goods, because this is like the Roman way of like circulating wealth, right? Yeah. Well, the Samhain, if you look at the Samhain festival, they do this too. They do the same. This is where we get Halloween from, right? Yeah. So how do we get Halloween? Well, so I'll tell you what happens. The Romans are smart as hell about getting cultures to interact with each other. The Halloween is the All Saints Day. That's a Christian holiday. It's not a secret pagan holiday, like some people will say. Samhain, they're secretly celebrating
Satan and all that.
They're not doing that. It's like Christmas too. They're not secretly worshiping Saturn. Some of those rites do get brought into the fold, but that's what Christians do. Paul even says, if you're going to go to a dinner and they're sacrificing meats to idols, who gives a shit? You don't believe in those idols. This is in Corinthians. Paul says,
that's fucking base.
Those idols have no power over you. Who cares? Eat the meat. So this becomes like part of the Christian doctrine. This is why Christianity is so successful. Well, back to the All Saints Day. All Saints Day used to be in like March or June or something. I don't know, but it wasn't on November 1st. But they shift the holiday to November 1st in the north so that they can keep their Samhain festival, but they change they make it so, okay, this is All Saints Day now. But they're still doing all the dressing up, going door to door. So everyone's happy. You get your Christian holiday, the pagans get to have their fun, everyone's happy. And so this is the back to the whole Roman imperial cult playbook. This is how they by the way, there's hundreds of examples
of stuff like that, of
ancient pagan temples or pagan gods being transferred into angels. I'll give you one more example, and I'll shut up.
Yeah.
There's a saint called Saint Demetrius, and the story of Saint Demetrius is that he was a shepherd who was a worshiper of Demeter, of the Eleusinian mysteries. And the Eleusinian mysteries is central to Dionysus, Demeter.
Yep. All the fucking mushroom cult and all that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Ergot, right?
It's a huge religion. Socrates, Plato, Cleopatra,
Marcus Aurelius, right?
Marcus Aurelius, they're all initiated. This was the Christianity before. This was the Catholic Church before Catholic Church. This was the universal church. So they couldn't get rid of this religion. And even though Theodosius tried to outlaw and close down all the pagan temples and close down, people are still worshiping Demeter. She's the great goddess, right? So the Christians are, the Christians create this story about Saint Demetrius. Demetrius means Demeter's son. Demetrius. And so so in this story, Demeter visits him in a dream and tells him to worship Christ. And so now all the followers of the Eleusinian mysteries might read this story and go,
oh,
maybe
fuck.
it's just, yeah,
Christian.
you can see how slick Christianity is.
That's
And
so...
instead of just like, there are occasions of Christians just going in and just,
yeah, of course.
like you have the
Teutonic Order.
The Song of Roland. You ever read that text? It's about Charlemagne going in and just murdering pagans and just and they're praising him. How great is Charlemagne? He just killed 1 million pagans. Oh my God. So there are examples of them going the other route, but there is that aspect.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we ended up in this conversation at this part, because literally, so in the last couple, I have been thinking a lot about just framing my channel and what I'm doing and what I'm actually trying to accomplish. And the way that I put it, and I believe this, even though it sounds kind of funny, is I am waging a meme war in a Richard Dawkins sense. Okay, the enlightened centrist meme. I just want to create as a heuristic of stop doing what the far left says, and stop doing what the far right says. The answer: there's some reasonable path in the middle, right? And so I believe I'm waging mimetic warfare. The example of what you just talked about with the imperial cult and all that, in this integrating one meme with another, is exactly how I think that meme war has to be won. Where, okay, how do we move forward in society without going into violence? Like how the fuck are we ever gonna, solve the Israel-Palestine conflict? It's like arguably fucking never. But if there was a way forward that was not the wiping out of one side or the other, it is something like the Roman mimetic integration of two different ideas under some superordinate idea or whatever that takes into account you have your theological perspectives that are valid in this regard, and we have ours, and it's a meeting of the minds. And at least in the West, I think that enlightened centrism that's the meme that I'm writing right now. That's the army I've chosen. That's a character I've loaded up on in the great meme wars. And I think that's effective in a political domain, between like,
you're trying to be a pontifex. You're trying to build
exactly. And that works within the context of Western culture. The much harder enlightened centrist task, which is probably beyond me and maybe beyond anyone, is unifying the Judeo-Christian worldview or whatever with the Islamic worldview or the Hindu worldview or like the Chinese one. I will say though, as to be optimistic, and you would probably know more about this than I do, is in India. India is, to the degree that India is a successful democracy, that is evidence of the Christian meme sort of overtaking the Hindu meme complex, right? Because Hinduism, I believe, requires a caste system.
Yes,
right. The caste system is inherent to Hinduism.
That's the traditional Vedic worldview, is that the Brahmins are on top, priests, and then there's like the warrior caste.
And the untouchables at the bottom, right? Yeah. I believe that shit is illegal in India.
Is it?
I believe so. I could be wrong. Someone fact check me on that.
I'm not sure.
But to the degree that it's not practiced, is the caste system illegal in India? In 1948, negative discrimination on the basis of the caste was banned by law and further enshrined in the Indian Constitution of 1950. Okay. That's an example of the Christian idea, or the more Christian idea of everyone is equal before God, beating out the Hindu caste meme. And that's a kind of mimetic warfare that I'm thinking about in terms of how that's like, we didn't have you didn't have to conquer India and wipe out all the Hindus. It was a mimetic war that was waged to make the caste system illegal. And that's how I'm so I probably almost certainly going to now incorporate this imperial cult idea of like, exactly that. That's the OG form of mimetic warfare.
Yeah, it is.
The Roman idea.
Because I mean, you can look at the ancient gods as memes, kind of. They represent. So the pagan world. By the way, pagan just means rustic. Nobody called themselves pagans, so it really doesn't exist. They're just they're just devotees of some whatever specific cult. So in Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, there's a big temple of Aphrodite there. In Ephesus, there's a big temple of the goddess Artemis. In Athens, the Athena Acropolis. In Egypt, Serapis. So everywhere you go, there's different cults, and they integrate under the Roman imperial system. But what these gods represent are phenomena in nature that we all experience.
Yes, the archetypes.
Aphrodite is beautiful, love, fertility, things that you need for a society. You need fertility, you need beauty, you need love for people to procreate, right?
Yep.
Athena is this wisdom. She holds the shield. She has a helmet. She has a sword, and she represents the law. She represents like having a strict moral code for people to abide by. It's also the great equalizer, because we're all under a constitution. It gives us rights. It gives us limits.
Dionysus is the entertaining side, the social.
Yeah, the tragedy god. The tragedy god. You go to a play and you're watching a play and it's the tragedy. Dionysus is there with his satyrs.
Wasn't Dionysus the wine god?
Wine god. Yeah, he's a lot of things.
Sure,
Dionysus was a very big. I have lots of videos on Dionysus.
Isn't there like some sort of philosophical dichotomy between the Apollonian and Dionysian traditions? That's some sort of that maps on order and chaos.
Nietzsche was the big one to point this out, and he gets criticized for it by religious scholars of his time who weren't immersed in the text as he was. This is why Nietzsche is so gangster, because he can go into someone else's field and dominate them and say, "You don't know what you're talking about."
Philosophizing with a hammer.
Yeah. So Nietzsche turned out to be correct. On the Athenian calendars, there's sources that mention this. What's his name? He wrote the Saturnalia. Anyways, and then there's texts that describe the Athenian calendars would have mark half the year with Apollo on top, all the years of summer and spring, and then the other half of the year is Dionysus, all the years of darkness and fall and winter. So you can see the ancient Greeks have this dual nature system of these two faces of the same. And he actually says this in the text. He says that Dionysus and Apollo are actually one and the same god. And he says, Apollo is this god of order, this god of basically, the way I would describe it is heavenly fate. Like you are given your fate from above, and there's hierarchy. Hierarchy is to be followed. Law and order is to be followed. And then the songs that are dedicated to Apollo were called paeans, and they're like ordered music. They're music for triumphs, for big celebrations. Dionysus, on the other hand, is the opposite, where it's instead of hierarchy, it's get out of whatever system. You need to break out of being a slave. Slaves become masters through inspiration, through intoxication, through ecstasy. You rise up, and it's from below. It's chthonic. It's underworldly. You're rising up from the bottom, and it's equality. It's the music
that maps on to Order and Chaos.
It does.
Order and Chaos is
his music
meta dichotomy, and I like that.
And his music dedicated to him is called a dithyramb, and it's not like the paean. It's way more like wild. It's more like wild chords. It's meant for like they would perform these at like drinking festivals. It's like rap music today.
Yeah.
It's very much like bringing up your spirit. So those two are opposing each other, but together you get something like a yin and a yang, where if you can balance both together, you have harmony.
Right. Okay. Two things. First off, I have to piss like a racehorse. Can you see the chat?
Yes.
Okay. I want to give people an opportunity to ask some questions that we can pull up and answer. I'm going to run to the bathroom. I'll come right back if you want to scan it for a bit. And then we can wrap up in 10, 15 minutes or so, something like that.
Yeah, sure, man.
Perfect. Okay. Yes. I'll be right back. Please entertain.
I will.
In whatever way you see fit. Just
Yeah, I'll just
No.
continue talking until I see someone ask something. So, you know, another thing that I wanted to talk about that we didn't really get into is the death of God thing. And Jordan Peterson sort of describes it as this mournful thing that Nietzsche is, you know, portraying in his text. Like, we killed God. Oh, the Christian God was so good. Look what we did. Well, it's actually, I think this is a misinterpretation, because if you actually do read Nietzsche, in other books, it's not just in Thus Spoke Zarathustra where he announces the death of God. He does it in The Gay Science. And in The Gay Science, he actually further elaborates and says people like himself, the artist types, are cheering this on. So he's not mourning the death of God. He's saying this Christian God that have been dominated by for the last 1,500 years is actually not worthy of being worshipped. We've created a God that can't be believed in, because it's all about dogma, and it's all about these reversing of, it's all about like taking the lowly and making them high. And so Nietzsche I think I have the text here. He says, in fact, we philosophers and free spirits feel ourselves irradiated as by a new dawn by the report that the old God is dead. Our hearts overflow with gratitude, astonishment, presentiment, and expectation. At last, the horizon seems opened once more. Granting even that it is not bright, our ships can at last put out to sea in face of every danger. Every hazard is again permitted to the discerner. The sea, our sea, again lies open before us. Perhaps never before did such an open sea exist. That is not mourning over the death of God. That is a triumph over the death of God. And if you read Nietzsche, dude, he straight up tells us, oh, here we go. We got a question from Jim Bob. Neal, can you tell us about the maroon backdrop? Maroon backdrop. Oh, this? It's just it's satanic, Jim Bob. Is that what you wanted to hear? It's red? No, it's just a red color, Joe Rogan style, you know. Jim Bob comes in the chat with some crazy shit. Can you tell us about the maroon backdrop? Yeah, it's satanic. Is that what you want to hear? But anyways, I was teaching them about the death of God through Nietzsche. When he actually says in the book Gay Science, he triumphs over it. I like Jim Bob, by the way. That's my boy. I watch his shit, dude. Even though we disagree on a lot of things, I like Jim Bob. I think he's a character. I like people who are just straight up raw and honest. Don't give a shit.
I cannot stand Jim Bob because
I respect that, though. I have this thing. I get in trouble all the time. I'm friends with Giorgiani. I'm friends with Robert Price. I'm friends with Jim. People go, why do you platform these bigots? And I'm just, hey, I just want to, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's my past, but I just respect people who are you know who they are. There is no, like, they're not trying to bullshit you. You know exactly who Jim Bob is. He's right out there.
I respect people who respect strength. I have no respect for Jim Bob because he called me a slur when he was trying to get me on his show. And I said, if you think that I would negotiate with someone who started off the conversation by calling me a slur, then you think I'm morally weak, and I will not tolerate that. I'm just kidding. I have laughed out loud at some of what Jim Bob says. Let's say that.
Pretty funny.
Okay. Any questions or anything that were interesting?
Someone asked, is dog whistling honest or passive aggressive? What do you think about that?
I like Pine Creek Doug's description of dog whistling. Dog whistling is a dog whistle. When you say that someone is using a dog whistle, that's a dog whistle. Because what you're saying, if I'm saying Neal is dog whistling or is using white supremacist dog whistles, what I'm really saying is Neal's a white supremacist, but I'm not actually saying it. I'm just saying that your dog. So it's a fucking. I believe that's.
I think people use that as a cop out to not deal.
Totally.
Like,
but I do believe there's truth to it.
Off. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. There is some truth to, like, it's kind of mimetic, as you would say, mimetic. Like, kind of just getting. It's just you can just kind of read it, but it's not always some like secret thing that's some secret messages being because it's like, if that's really the case, then how many people are actually going to be receiving that message?
I saw someone said culture is just a dog whistle for race, and I'm like, that is literally the dumbest fucking thing I think I've ever seen, maybe in my life. I cannot explain to you how fundamentally.
What do they mean by that?
I think it means like, well, if I say black culture, that means black race. Now that certainly I can see people going, oh, well, black culture is this way and this. And of course, all culture is worthy of criticism. But like, it's so fundamental in everything I believe that culture is the software of ideas, race and biology, that's the hardware of and those are fundamentally separate. What was I going to say about fucking dog whistles? Christ is king. Did you see that whole controversy?
Yeah.
That I understand as like, that's an example of, I can see how this could be seen as a dog whistle. Now I made a video saying I'm going to say Christ is king because I'm not going to let a bunch of autistic Zoomer Nazis appropriate that word or appropriate that phrase in the same way that, for example, a bunch of autistic Zoomer Nazis could on Christmas get together with their little frog shirts and their little Groiper memes or Groiper stuff, and they could go to a synagogue and they could loudly sing Christmas carols. Now the news will say alt-right, far-right fascists singing Christmas carols at a synagogue. Is singing Christmas carols anti-Semitic? I'd go, no, you dumb motherfuckers. Of course, what they're doing is specifically going after, the Jewish synagogue or whatever. But the solution to that is to not say, well, let's not Christmas carol because we don't want to associate that. It's like, it's to be a louder Christmas caroler, but in the genuine spirit of it, right? So like with Christ is king, it's like, say Christ is king, but then loudly say, and the number one message of Christ, one of them, it doesn't matter what your fucking race is, including whether or not you're Jewish.
Yeah, and the reason why that whole thing started is because in the text in Matthew, he's the king of the Jews. So when you say Christ is king, that's what's on his cross. When he's sentenced to death, they write "King of the Jews" on there.
Yeah. As a
mockery. It becomes, when you say it becomes like, oh, Christ is your king, and like, but it's such a weird thing because we're dealing with, if they believe this, if you're a Christian, you believe this, then nothing else really should matter other than you have to stand for that. So you have to sort of, in this multicultural humanist system, you have to account for religion in that sense. You have to understand this is what they stand for. So I don't know how this is one of those things of what this is where a lot of these problems arise. Cultural clashing happening because of that.
Yeah. And I would say this is why Peterson is so squirrely about whether or not he believes in God. He's like, well, do you believe in God, Jordan Peterson?
What do you mean by
like,
God?
Well, that, but it's also like, if you truly believed that God was real and that if you don't obey him, you go to hell and that you're supposed to be his divine, it's like, what would it mean to embrace that fully? It's like, you would literally commit your life to that. And you would say Christ is king all the time and or you wouldn't just say Christ is king. You would literally sell the clothes on your back on behalf of the Christian ideas and stuff. I think one thing you said in the stream, I'm curious if you still believe this or your mind has changed. On equality, the one a while back where you were criticizing Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
Equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity.
Sure.
I'm 100% on equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome is communism. Although, and I believe Ben Shapiro says this, and I believe this, communism works at the local level. You should be a communist with your family, and you should be a socialist with your local community.
Yeah, it's the other way. If you flip this backwards, because this is what the early Christians were doing. If you look at the evidence, the earliest Christians, we're talking pre-church Christians, they were getting together and they were starting these little communal pockets of society, and they lived equally with each other. And they would rotate their jobs and everything. And so you can see, and this is where the monastic lifestyle, it's still today. You can go to Greeks today, and there's monasteries, and they're doing this type of world. They had this type of setup. And it's like, that doesn't mean they're communists as like the communist,
communist, yeah.
But as you pointed out, on a small scale, that can work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's yes, and I think the Bible. I think its prescriptions. My understanding, at least from Peterson, is the Bible in the New Testament, I think, is making more prescriptions at the individual and local level. It's not saying this is what your policy should be, which is why the render unto Caesar verse, I think, is valuable. Because, like, for example, it should say, you need to sell the clothes off your back to help the poor or whatever. It's like, well, in theory, in a truly Christian society, we wouldn't need social safety nets because there would be such a robust charitable system. And the libertarians make the argument that, well, that would exist, but because there's the government social security net, that's all there. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't want George Soros being the arbiter of whether or not, right-wing people get welfare or not. It's not that simple, but yeah, but I believe the Christian prescriptions are more on an individual, like local level rather than policy. Why?
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
which is why I don't buy the criticism that, like, well, Christians should be socialist. It's like, well, no, but in their family lives, of course, sure, be a socialist, your community.
That's a valid point. So you do have the verse in Acts 4 and 5 where anybody who joined would have to sell their property, give up all their lives, whatever their job is, put it at the feet of the apostles, and then you can get baptized.
Yeah.
So that's a very hardcore example of how the early Christians. So there's a textual example. What I'm basically saying is, even in the text itself, you can see how this was something people were following. However, the surrender under Caesar thing is a good point for you that you just made, because what it's saying, it's not saying like a lot. You get the Roman prop people. I don't know if you know who these people are. They think Christianity was just a conspiracy invented by the Romans, and that's why render under Caesar's in there. But they always forget. He says render under Caesar, and then he says render under God. They always leave that part out because they're just trying to make you think.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even think of that because I only know it in its.
It changes everything because he's saying Caesar is nothing. Who cares if he controls all the wealth? Who cares if he institutes laws that we have to follow? Who cares? Just do it.
It's not a matter of it's not a spiritual matter what the tax rate of international trade is. That's a worldly matter.
It's Middle Platonism is the dominant philosophy of the time period, and Middle Platonism is obviously Platonism, but it also incorporates Stoicism and cynicism. So you can see this in the render under Caesar thing.
Oh, interesting.
Cynical. It's very cynical of Caesar, but it's also very Stoic, saying you're going to be put through trials, wear your cross, and just get through it. Yeah. This is why I see a lot of Christians today who want to change government. It's kind of the opposite of the Christian message. The earliest Christians would just wear their cross and get to heaven. That's all that matters. Who cares about changing government? This world means nothing. Leave it behind. So, so it's very Stoic. Jesus was very Stoic in that sense, where he's saying you can't control what's around you. This is Satan's world. You have to wear your cross and get through it. That's it.
Amen. Christ is King. Okay. Are there any? We'll definitely talk again at some point. But are there any points that you want to wrap up now, or anything on your mind before we end here?
Well, when you were taking a piss, I was talking about the death of God thing, and I was wondering any thoughts on that. I don't know if you heard me at all. Did you hear me or no?
No. I only came in when I put my earbuds in.
Just to reiterate. So Peterson likes to spin this in a way where he makes Nietzsche into a mourning the death of the Christian God.
Oh, yes.
In actuality, if you read what Nietzsche wrote, he's cheering it on. And Nietzsche, if you read, so the first book he ever wrote was called Tragedy in the Age of the Greeks, right? That book is one of my favorite books of all time. And he gets into like the sophistry versus the rational thinker, all that stuff. But also in that book, he talks about the return, how the Greeks had it figured out. The Greeks, you can go to a master of the Cynic school, a master of the Stoic school. You can go to Socrates. You can go to Plato. There's all these different masters. There's all these different ideologies, and they're all clashing. Whereas the world that came afterwards was just unified under this dogma. And Nietzsche was saying that is what killed God. You created a God that is not even, you can't even believe in it anymore. Because once you find one fault in the system, the whole thing falls. Once you find out the world's not 6,000 years old, it's like, well, is this even true? What else is not true in this thing? Yeah. It's all done after that. But in the ancient Greek world, you have so many things floating around in the world that you can find truth in all these different areas. You have this world that's worthy. The gods are worthy again. Right?
Yeah, I know. I can only repeat what Peterson said, but his whole claim on Nietzsche is, the God is dead and we have killed him. Right? Is the single line, sort of like just if you take render onto Caesar or render onto Caesar out of context. God is dead and we have killed him. I think that he says that's like your 21-year-old philosophy student who's like, oh, we're cheering on the death of God. The rest of that line is God is dead when we have killed him, and who will wash, or what is it? Who will wash away the blood?
Oh,
We who have killed murderers.
Where will we find enough water to wash away all?
Yeah. And I know Nietzsche hated Christianity.
Oh yeah,
I know that, and I think Peterson acknowledges that.
He wrote the Antichrist.
Yeah. So I think Peterson's point is not that Nietzsche was like mourning Christianity in that he loved Christianity. I think he knew the role. Yeah, he knew the regulating role that Christianity had. That when it died, then it be broken up, and then it was like, well, then we got communism and
he basically, and he's looking at the tenets, the core tenets of Christianity as this system where it's like we were talking about Caesar. In the Roman imperial cult, Caesar's on top, slaves are on the bottom. In Christianity, a slave can be on top. Remember, like you said,
fall short.
The first will be last, the last will be first. Yes. It's the flipping of the poles. It's the anti-Caesar. By the way, Nero in Revelation is 666. So the Antichrist literally is Caesar.
Oh, interesting.
Jesus is the anti-Caesar. He's the Christ, right? So Nietzsche's looking at this and saying they flipped the poles. They made slave morality the dominant philosophy. And he says once the God is removed and people have nothing else to, all those tenets are still going to rule. And by the way, it's not just Nietzsche who writes this. There's other authors from that time period and in the 1940s and stuff that wrote about communism comes from Christianity, not from the God side.
Yes.
From the side of equality and
it's Christianity untethered to its regulating roots, or whatnot. Something like, I think Tom Holland, not the actor but the theologian, I think he says something similar.
Oh,
and Marxism and Christianity.
A lot of people wrote about this. Who wrote the books Christ and Caesar? Who wrote that book? Oh, Will Durant. Will Durant does this. Will Durant has pages written on why communism and socialism are sort of derived from
Christianity,
Christian ethics, right? There's another author who wrote. I have his book over here. I don't know. Maybe I didn't drink enough coffee today or something. I can't remember anything right now. But okay, I'll just say it. There's other authors who talk about the fundamentals underlying Christianity is where we get all this socialist equity stuff coming from.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Social justice.
Social justice, yes. All right. The next time we talk, I'm saying this as a reminder so I can go back and watch this before the next time we talk. We can talk about will to power versus will to meaning, which I think is the fundamental. That's Nietzsche versus Viktor Frankl. And I think the will to meaning, I think to the degree that I understand Nietzsche, which is not at all, will to power being the driving, motivating force in humans. I think that's not accurate. I think will to meaning, which is Frankl's proposition, that's a more accurate way of describing things. But we can get into that the next time.
Absolutely. This flew right by, man. This was fun.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and chat has been quiet, which is actually nice because I think that means people are paying attention. So that's good. Although, what is this? Jordan has no qualifications to interpret that of the Bible. It's like getting philosophy from a mechanic. Listen, nobody hates classism more than I do. Okay, and I would say a mechanic who does philosophy is a more wholesome character than a philosopher that pursues.
I agree with
mechanics.
I agree with Fenton on the aspect of he's not a Bible scholar, he's not a linguist, there's things that he's looking at that he can't. But you can say from a psychological perspective, he does have the qualifications to sort of do a Jungian analysis on it.
Yeah. And I think, and Ian McGilchrist, who I'm a big fan of, makes the point of like, one of the problems today that we're too siloed, where we say, if you're not an expert in this, then you can't talk about it. It's like, yeah, but who is left to assemble the broader picture? That we need people like that. And I think that's where Peterson comes in. But anyway, we can cover that. Anyway, thank you for watching. Neal, we'll stay on for a couple minutes after we hang out.
Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks all. Neal and I will talk again. And Godspeed. Peace.